Get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Nancy Powell, and I am a member of West Newbury Wild and Native and the wildlife biologist at Parker River National Wildlife Refuge. And this presentation is brought to you collaboration between Wild and Native, Parker River, and the G.A.R Memorial Library. We will be recording this talk today, and the recording will be available at the library YouTube channel, the Wild Native website, and also on West Newbury's cable access channel. West Newbury Wild and Native is a community group made up of residents of West Newbury and adjacent towns, passionate about promoting native plants, wildlife-friendly gardening, and dark skies. We meet monthly to learn from each other and experts and believe that conservation starts in our own backyard and is best done 1 yard at a time. Tonight, we are going to be focusing on why it's important to preserve dark skies as an opportunity that we still have in West Newbury. Our speaker tonight is going to be talking a lot more about that, so I won't go into that. But let me introduce Madeline Kaplan, who I am lucky to be working with at the Parker River Refuge. Madeline grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, and became interested in anything wildlife and conservation while spending summers at camp in the mountains of West Virginia. After graduating from UMass Amherst with a bachelor's degree in biology in 2020, what a year, she has worked seasonal positions in the Boston Harbor Islands, in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and in coastal South Carolina while exploring her interests in birds, coastal ecosystems, and environmental education. In July of last year, she started her position at Parker River National Wildlife Refuge, where she is involved in a variety of projects, including shorebird monitoring, migratory songbird banding, salt marsh restoration, school field trip. Over to Madeline. I just want to mention that if you related to what she's talking about, I'll pose her the question. Otherwise, we'll wait to the end for discussion. So go ahead, Madeline.
Awesome. Thank you, Nancy. And yes, definitely I'll share my screen in a minute. And I know like the Wi-Fi between Nancy and mine computers as well. If I cut out at any point and need to repeat myself, yeah, definitely feel free to comment and let me know. Okay, I'm gonna attempt to share my screen. So give me a moment and then let me know if this is working. How's that? Working. Okay, awesome. Okay, awesome. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm gonna just move this up to the corner. Okay, great. So thank you to the library and Nancy and West Newbury Wild and Native for having me here tonight. I'm glad you are all here, and I'm really excited to be talking to you about this topic. It's a topic that I find really personally very interesting, and is something I think we don't think about that much or talk about in our daily lives, at least most of us. Okay, so when I'm talking about protecting dark skies, it's so strange to be talking on Zoom without like seeing any people, but yeah, definitely feel free to chime in if I cut out or anything. When I talk about protecting dark skies, what from basically? What are we trying to protect them from? Artificial human-made light is the answer. But before I dive into talking about why dark skies are important and how they've inspired us and been a part of our evolution for thousands and thousands of years, I wanted to start out by saying that light at night itself is not bad, and it's not the villain of the story that I'm trying to talk about tonight. And I would even say that, you know, light at night can be really good. I get scared of the dark sometimes. Light can be really beautiful at night, and we use it for all these reasons. You know, it helps us guide us to where we need to go, find things. It can create a sense of place and of coziness, like sort of lights in the window on a cold winter's night or something like that. But just like anything else, we can have too much of a good thing. And right now we do sort of have that. And just like anything else, when we use it in extreme excess and without a lot of thoughtfulness, that can lead to some poor results. So what we really need is a better, more intentional balance of natural darkness and artificial light. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. And so the message that I would love everyone to come away with is not that, all artificial light at night is bad. We're never going to stop using artificial light at night. There's too many good things that come along with it. But instead, something closer to we can and we should change the way that we use artificial light at night so that it's less harmful for both people and for wildlife. So starting at the top, sort of what is light pollution? This is what we're going to be talking about. And at its most simple, it's the alteration of outdoor light levels from those occurring naturally. And it's done by us, caused by people. So you can see this LA cityscape, tons of lights, lots of light pollution. And I'm going to be using the term light pollution a lot throughout the presentation. And it was helpful for me to sort of zoom in on and think about that term because it's something you've probably heard used before. But it was helpful in my head to reframe things and start thinking about light as a pollutant, just like any other pollutant. So a good parallel might be something like nitrogen. So nitrogen pollution is a big environmental problem. It can cause a lot of negative impacts, but at the baseline, plants need nitrogen to grow, and adding nitrogen-based fertilizer to farmland has helped us, feed a huge population on way less farmland than we otherwise would have needed. So there's lots of good things. But when there's too much nitrogen fertilizer that gets applied and not a lot of care taken to prevent it from moving into places it shouldn't be, like into waterways and stuff like that, we end up with a lot of negative outcomes and problems like contaminated water, algal blooms, oceanic dead zones, and stuff like that. Similarly, light itself is not the issue here. We use light for lots of positive things, but when we have this huge excess of artificial light and we use it in a way where it ends up places and it shouldn't be, and we didn't mean it to be, it can become an environmental pollutant just like any other. So I think reframing it as a pollutant similar to plastic or nitrogen and carbon is a helpful way to think about this issue. So there's 4 different components of light pollution that are all a bit different. And it's not about the source of light, it's more about where and how the light is polluting or intruding. So one light source can cause multiple different kinds of pollution. So you can see in this diagram over here, this one street lamp is casting sky into a useful light, casting light into this useful zone, but it's also shining upwards into the night sky, and it's causing glare directly onto this person and getting into the windows of this house. So this one light source can cause multiple different kinds of light pollution. So one of those kinds is glare, like that is happening for this person down here. And that's where there is excessive brightness that can cause a lot of visual discomfort. When a bright light is directly visible to our eye without any kind of shielding, it contrasts with the dark surroundings and can actually make it harder to see. It works against our night vision, contracts our pupils and everything like that. And it can be more than just discomfort. It can be a safety hazard. So when the light that we're exposed to is brighter than our eyes can handle, we can lose the ability to distinguish objects. You can think of, like when someone has their brights on coming at you in a car, you sort of can lose the ability to actually see that car coming towards you, or have to squint, or you lose the night vision that you had previously adjusted your eyes to. So that is glare. We also have light trespass, and that is when light is falling where it's not intended and not needed. So basically when light is illuminating more than just the area we intended it to. So a good example would just be, these street lights are intended to illuminate the street below them, but they aren't guarded, or they're designed poorly or placed poorly. So they're shining light upwards into the sky and also into the windows of these apartments or these houses. And that is trespassing into those areas. Which is not where we meant the light to go in the first place. We also have clutter, and that's when there's bright and confusing excessive groups of lighting sources, so multiple sources of lighting that are all close together. It can lead to over brightness and a situation where lots of different lighting types are competing to be seen against this background level of light. So everything needs to be brighter and brighter and brighter to be seen against this background existing level of light pollution. So lots of lights all in an area together, casting too much light. And lastly, we have sky glow, and that's the brightening of the night sky over inhabited areas. And that happens when light gets emitted upward into the sky. It scatters in the atmosphere and gets reflected off the underside of clouds. And that creates this diffuse glow over a city or town that stays there. So going back a little bit, all of this excess artificial light is really an effect of urbanization, industrialization, which brought about the advent of electricity. And so in 1879, the first incandescent light bulbs designed by Thomas Edison went up in New York City. And electric outdoor lighting was adopted and spread really quickly after that. Like beforehand, we were using candles and whale blubber and all these stinky and expensive ways to try to keep working and traveling at night, but electricity made it way more possible and spread really quickly. So throughout the 20th century, the night sky brightened at an estimated rate of 3 to 6% per year as we continue to light streets and homes and outdoor places. It only really started to be seen as a issue in the 1970s because astronomers started finding even then that the lightening of the sky was impacting their observations and disrupting their ability to see out into the universe. Since then, the rate of annual brightening has actually increased a lot. So between 2011 and 2022, the sky was brightening at a rate of around 10% per year. So really, really quickly, we're adding a lot more light to our night sky. It's already a pretty big issue, and it's just getting worse and worse a little bit at a faster rate. So you can see here the nighttime illuminance from light pollution in North America from the 50s to projected in 2025, and goes from just a few urban centers having a lot of nighttime sky brightness to, most of the United States experiencing a lot of light pollution and sky brightness at night. And yeah, it's pretty widespread, this issue. So we're looking at the nighttime illuminance of the New York City area with Boston up there in the corner. 80% of the world's population is living under light polluted skies, and almost everyone in the United States and Europe is experiencing sky glow to some degree at night. 4 out of 5 people in North America can't see the Milky Way. About a third of the people in the world aren't seeing the Milky Way at night. And on a typical, dark night without a lot of light pollution, you'd expect to be able to see around 2,000 stars. But from the average American suburb, people are only seeing about a few hundred, so a lot less. Another note is, 40% of people in the United States are never really using their night vision because they live under extreme levels of nighttime brightness. So we're not even really turning on these adaptations that we have to deal with darkness because we're experiencing pretty constant levels of light that we wouldn't naturally. So one anecdote that really drove this home for me was in 1994, there was a big earthquake in LA that caused a lot of power outages throughout the whole city. And all these emergency call centers were flooded with reports of this giant cloud in the sky, and people thought it might be aliens, and they were calling 911, and it was the Milky Way. So that was the silvery cloud that they were seeing. But yeah, I just think that really kind of drives home how widespread this issue is. It's everywhere. It's affecting how we perceive the world around us, but most of us don't really think about it much. And maybe some of that's because we don't know what we're missing. We're used to really light skies that would be, really different than something we would have seen 100, 200 or more years ago because of the constant levels of light pollution most of us live in. Before we dive into the rest of the presentation, I'm going to focus more there about the impacts that light pollution has on people and on wildlife, but I also came across this concept of night sky heritage. And that's basically the idea that throughout human history until very recently, I'll try playing this video. Hopefully it will work. Okay, I think it's working. Yeah, but basically throughout human history until recently, we've been looking up at night to the sky that's dark and full of stars. And that's been a really big source of inspiration for religion and science and art and literature. And if you think about all those things, you can probably it comes to mind how the night sky has influenced all of those. Yeah, basically that experiencing the night sky can inspire a sense of curiosity about the world and allows us to reflect on our place in the universe. But that heritage of a sort is not really being passed on because most people now aren't experiencing this same night sky that we used to. And so that's sort of an intangible loss that I wanted to mention as well before we go into the more tangible harms. One example in terms of arts and literature that comes to mind is, Starry Night by Vincent van Gogh. He painted this in Saint-Remy in France in 1889, and someone there today would not be able to see the Milky Way. And perhaps his inspiration for this painting wouldn't be the same if he was there today. All right, so I'm gonna move into talking about why having a dark sky is important for people and touching on human health, the money and energy we spend, and of course, climate change as well. Okay, so I'll start this part out by just saying that, this is a new issue relatively. So this pervasiveness of it, there's lots of ongoing research about the long-term effects. And it can also be hard to draw a really direct link between exposure to light pollution and health outcomes because we're almost all being exposed to light pollution of some capacity. With all that said, though, there's definitely a significant human impact that we're beginning to learn more and more about. So of course, what might come to mind first when we think of health impact is sleep. When we have a lot of light, we're probably not going to sleep as well. And we all maybe have experienced that. So the American Medical Association has found that brighter residential nighttime lighting is associated with all these negative health outcomes like reduced sleep time and dissatisfaction with sleep quality, excessive sleepiness, all of this kind of stuff. So what's happening here is that we, like most organisms, have evolved to be in tune with a 24-hour light and dark cycle. And we have a biological clock that regulates this, our circadian rhythm. And this healthy circadian rhythm helps to regulate not just our sleep and wake cycle, but also metabolism, cardiovascular function, cognition, memory. So it's really doing a lot. And this is all regulated in our brain in the hypothalamus in this bundle of neurons called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. That's sort of our master clock center. And the way we set our clock is by intaking light through our eyes in photoreceptors in our eyes. And so the main issue is that when we intake light at night, artificial light, it's disrupting this system. So when we take in light through our eyes, we're producing serotonin, making us feel energized. And then without light, when we're experiencing dark, we start to produce melatonin, which helps us feel sleepy. When we take in a lot of light at night, we are basically telling our clock it's daytime, so it suppresses melatonin production. And if you look at the sort of complicated figure at the bottom here, it's basically showing how much illuminance you can see over here on this side, which is measured in lux. So basically the brightness level. So you can see there's at the bottom, a really cloudy night is very low brightness. On a really clear sunny day, there's really high brightness. And then for all these animals, how much brightness it takes to start suppressing melatonin. So looking at people, we want to be looking at this sort of green bar where it says 6 lux. Even 6 lux of light can start suppressing melatonin in us. And you can see outdoor lighting here is definitely enough light to suppress melatonin in us. So it's already starting to affect our circadian rhythm. And you can see for these other species or other, mammals, rodents, birds, fish, even just a little bit of light is sufficient. A little bit of lux is sufficient to start suppressing melatonin in them as well. So outdoor lighting definitely has an impact. And you can see here it says ALAN levels. This is going to come up throughout some of the other things we're going to talk about. So that's artificial light at night. That's the acronym ALAN. Another issue is that disrupting our circadian rhythm doesn't just mess with our sleep schedule. Like we were talking about, the circadian rhythm is actually linked to a bunch of other things in our metabolism. And this disrupted circadian rhythm is a risk factor for mood disorders and depression, and even for cancer. Because many of the processes involved in cancer, like cell division, also have daily cycles that are linked to the circadian rhythm. So this is known to have been a risk factor for cancer since studies dating back to the 1990s. There's specifically a pretty substantial association, not a causative effect necessarily, but an association between artificial light at night, ALAN, and breast cancer specifically. And then in terms of a causative effect in the lab, and so not out in the real world, but in the lab, scientists have found a causative effect of light at night in tumorigenesis, so tumor production in rodents. So when they're exposed to light all night long and all day long, constant levels of light, they have way increased levels of tumor production, basically, for all of these reasons. They're altered endocrine rhythms, the genes that are disrupted with our clock genes, basically, the sleep disruption that comes about, and inflammation. So people are still figuring out exactly what's going on here, but there's definitely the circadian rhythm is taking care of a lot of things in us, not just becoming alert and getting sleepy. So there's a lot of other health impacts that are possible too when we disrupt our circadian rhythm with a lot of light at night. So exposure to any kind of light at night can start to suppress melatonin, but our photoreceptors are most sensitive to high energy blue light. Blue light is in natural sunlight too, and it's totally good for us in the daytime. It can boost our attention and mood and all that kind of stuff, but it's especially disruptive at night because it suppresses melatonin up to 5 times more than other colors and wavelengths of light. So you can see that the blue light is here in the high energy spectrum, and red light is at the other end of the visible spectrum. It's way less high energy, and that's kind of the best outdoor lighting. You want outdoor lighting to be warmer. We'll talk about this more, but it doesn't suppress melatonin as much, and it doesn't mess up your night vision as much, which is why you might see red light used for, wildlife or night fishing and that kind of thing like that. Unfortunately, most of us probably expose ourselves, including me, to a lot of blue light in the evenings because all of our devices and smartphones and TVs and tablets emit blue light because they mostly use LEDs, which we're going to talk about more in detail, but they're way more energy efficient, but they also produce more blue light. So that's another thing to be thinking about. So lastly, on the human health side of things, it seems to me like one of the main reasons we want to use outdoor nighttime lighting is because we want to be safe. We want to get where we're going, want to be able to do what we need to be doing, but we also feel safer when we can see what's going on. So we want to light things up at night. But really, visibility is what is important. So of course, we still want to light some places, like a busy crossroad and junction or something like that, in a way where people are highly visible and we can do what we need to do. But overall, there's no scientific evidence that just more lighting in general leads to more safety and less crime. So you can look at this first quote. There's a study of using different street light regimes. So they looked at at 62 different authorities in England and Wales. They tried a bunch of different schemes like dimming the street lights at night, turning them all the way off at night, turning them off at certain hours of the night, et cetera, a few different things. And they found no significant difference in car collisions or on crime. So having the lights on all the time in this situation didn't necessarily make people safer at all. And then another study in Australia found that specifically brightly lit places don't correlate with women's feelings of urban safety. And in fact, they found that sites with higher light levels were perceived as more unsafe by women. And part of that was found that it was because bright lights create these high contrast areas. So if a path is overly lit and is super bright, it may mean that everything outside of that path is now completely shrouded in darkness by comparison. And it creates these zones that you don't want to go in and you cannot see, and that it makes people feel unsafe. So we can kind of see here that too much badly designed lighting can kind of have the opposite effect on visibility. So you can see here, there's this person who was in the corner, that we can see more clearly when this light is shielded and is less bright. But when it's really bright, it creates this dark zone over here that we can't see anything in, because this light is too bright and is unshielded. But when we change how that lighting goes a little bit by blocking it with our hand, our visibility actually increases a lot. So that brightness and glare, like we were talking about, can create something that happens where we're not adjusted to the low light conditions around us, and it actually reduces our visibility. So more lighting doesn't necessarily make us more safe. And moving on to sort of money and energy, of course, when we're using more light than we need, and at places and times where it's not needed, it produces waste, which has economic consequences and energy consequences. So in the US alone, 2.5% of the electricity that we consume is spent on nighttime outdoor lighting. And of that, 30% of it ends up just in the night sky, shone up into the night sky because of poorly designed or unshielded outdoor lighting. So that 30% is equivalent to about $3 billion wasted every year. That's just illuminating the night sky. It's not illuminating places that we need to be or we need to be walking through or moving through at all. And if we look at outdoor lighting in total, not just the outdoor lighting that's lost upwards, we consume really a ton of electricity on lighting the outdoor spaces, enough to power 35 million homes. So there's a lot of waste going on here that it would be great if we could start to minimize. Of course, producing all of that electricity produces carbon emissions. So to power residential outdoor lighting, just in the US, we're producing about 15 million tons of carbon dioxide a year, about 40,000 tons a day. That's equivalent to the emissions of 3 million passenger cars just for this outdoor lighting. To offset all that, we would need to plant about 600 million trees every year. So probably not going to happen. So of course we need and we do want some of that residential outdoor light, but as you can see, a lot of it is unneeded and is wasted. Some of it's just going straight up to the night sky, never even illuminating anything on the ground that we meant it to. And it ends up contributing a lot of carbon to the atmosphere and accelerating all the negative effects of climate change that we're already seeing. So not only is it harming us in the long term with climate change and the carbon load in the atmosphere, but as we have seen, it's also harming us in the short term. So it's sort of a double whammy, and it has a lot of, if we're able to reduce how much electricity we're using on lighting the outdoors, we could potentially have a good effect on both of these things, both the short-term health and the long-term impacts of climate change. So on that note, I'm going to switch it up a little bit and start delving into the impact that light pollution has on wildlife too. And bringing it back a little bit to circadian rhythms, like we talked about, that evolved way back in the tree of life, basically, so billions of years ago. And as a result, most living organisms, animals, plants, even something like cyanobacteria, also have some kind of internal endogenous oscillator that is their circadian clock. Of course, ours is pretty complicated and fancy. You've got thousands of neurons and everything like that. But most organisms have evolved to be able to synchronize to the 24-hour light-dark cycle that they evolved with. So as you might expect, when we change that, when we produce a lot of light at night as well, that can cause a lot of significant impacts on wildlife too. So sea turtles are sort of the classic example that comes to my mind when I think about how wildlife can be harmed by artificial light. Probably because there's such a direct link between the harm and the light, and also sea turtles are so cute, and this is something that I feel like I grew up hearing about and learning about. So sea turtles, of course, are coming to shore to lay their eggs on sandy beaches. And as we know, living by a coastal community and everything, those are places where people often also really want to be. It's prime real estate for both people and for turtles. And so there tends to be a lot of development and a lot of people and a lot of artificial light near these beaches where they're coming up to lay eggs. And this can impact both the adults and the hatchlings. So the females are trying to come to shore at dark places to deposit their eggs, and really bright lights can deter them from coming to shore, and it also can confuse them. If they do come to shore, they're less likely to make a nest attempt if there's really bright lights around, and they can get disoriented. Once they do lay eggs and the eggs hatch out, that's going to happen mostly during the late evening to the early morning. So it's happening at night, and the hatchling's first instinct is to head for the open water. And they use a few things to tell them which way to go. They use the slope of the beach downward towards the water, but their biggest cue is to rely on light, because they know to go towards light, because under natural conditions, the horizon over the ocean is going to be the brightest thing, brighter than the horizon over land, because the ocean water is going to reflect starlight and moonlight. Even on a cloudy night, that's going to be brighter than the total darkness of land behind them. But of course, that totally changes if there is a bunch of hotels or houses and a lot of bright lights up on the beach behind them. So the hatchlings can become confused and head away from the ocean towards the lights. And even a single bright light can lure a lot of hatchlings from a beach away from the ocean. And of course, we don't want this to happen because they're really little. They can get confused and they become exhausted, often trying to go the wrong way towards the ocean. They get picked off by predators. They are lured towards people where there's more cars and other dangers for them. So this makes them really vulnerable. And you can see over here in this image, this house has red lights on the beach, or beach facing, as this turtle is laying her eggs, which is great. That's what we want, because that red light is less harmful to wildlife and to us, but it's producing less energy and is less disorienting for wildlife. So in addition to turtles, birds are really affected by light pollution as well. A lot of birds are migratory, and they've evolved this way to take advantage of seasonal resource abundances and move north. as it gets warmer in our hemisphere, and south as it gets cooler. So this spring, 3.5 billion birds are returning and have mostly returned to the US from places south of here, like in the Caribbean, Central and South America. So this is a really huge annual movement of billions and billions of animals. Most of these species are nocturnal migrants, and they migrate at night for a variety of reasons. So for one, they're using the stars and moon to navigate. They also use like the Earth's magnetic field and some other things, but some species are learning a north-south orientation from the pattern of the stars moving. Also, flying at night makes them less vulnerable to predation because things like hawks and raptors are more active during the daytime. At night, there's generally calmer air. They don't have to deal with the thermals that happen during the day. And also, most of these birds are doing constant flapping flight, so they're burning a lot of energy. They're not just soaring through the night sky, they're flapping the whole time. So flying at night when the air is cooler helps them maintain a lower body temperature and reduce how much water they're losing and all that kind of stuff. So most of them are nocturnal migrants. And migration is a very dangerous and exhausting period for birds. It's the most dangerous time of their whole year. Their mortality rate is 6 times higher during migration than during the other periods where they're stationary. And they have to do a bunch of stuff. They have to fly over these huge distances. Some of them are flying over the open ocean for days at a time. They're looking for a safe place to stop and refuel. They're navigating unfamiliar habitats. They've got a lot going on. And on top of all of that, they're also impacted by light pollution. And so it's been found that migratory birds are experiencing higher levels of light pollution in the areas that they pass through during migration compared with areas that they stay in during the breeding season and the wintering season. So on top of all the other difficulties that they're dealing with during this high danger period of their annual cycle, they also have light pollution to contend with as well. And that can be a problem for a variety of reasons. So for one, it can impact the timing of their migration. So birds are using photoperiod, which is how long the days are. So as they get longer, they know spring is arriving and it's time to head north. They can misinterpret artificial light at night as longer daylight, and they might start migrating too early, which can lead to this missed time where they've started moving before there's enough insects or enough seeds for them to be eating. But more importantly, artificial light at night draws birds into urban areas, which is not where they want to be. There's not a lot of good habitat in really urban areas. There's not places for them to rest and refuel. There's lots of predators like cats and coyotes. There's tons of buildings. But this light glow cast from an urban center can draw birds in from as far as 3 miles away. So it's a huge attractor. And they end up entrapped, circling around these bright areas. They can deplete their energy stores that they need for migration. They get weak and might not be able to continue onwards, and they can become easy prey. So if you look over here, these beams in the sky over here are from the Tribute in Light in Manhattan, which is a memorial to the victims of 9/11 that they do every year. And these lights are directed into the sky. And of course, this happens to be during a pretty peak time of fall migration. And so New York Audubon noticed that this was drawing in a ton of birds, and they did a study and found that bird densities when this was going on were up to 150 times what would normally be happening. And it was drawing in something like 150,000 plus birds just on that one night, just to these beams shot into the sky, because they're really, really bright. So thankfully, this led to a pretty good workable solution for both groups. This is really important to a lot of people to be doing. So what they found is that if they dim the lights just periodically, it allows the birds to disperse and stops becoming sort of entrapped in this bright light zone. So if they dim them for just a few minutes, the birds are able to disperse, shake their heads, and keep moving on. So now what occurs every year is that New York Audubon monitors, and if a certain number of birds become entrapped, they'll notify the Tribute in Light crew, and they're able to dim the lights enough for the birds to disperse, and then they can continue with this tribute. So that's sort of a good example of a workable solution dealing with light at night and birds during migration. An even bigger issue than just entrapment in light areas is that once they're attracted into these densely populated areas, birds often crash into windows and collide into buildings. So building collisions are one of the biggest sources of mortality for birds. Total, it can kill, somewhere between 500 million and 1 billion birds every year just in the United States. And so it's not just tall skyscrapers and glass buildings that are a problem. Even shorter buildings and residential buildings can cause a lot of fatalities. So if you look in this top corner, all these birds laid out on a table are all from one collision on one night. one building at one night in Chicago, which has become sort of like an infamous place in terms of bird collisions because it's right by the lake. And a study found that turning the lights off in just a single window in that building helped reduce collisions. So they measured on a window by window basis, and they found that a darkened window was less likely to incur collisions. And even the lit windows surrounding that dark window were less likely to have a collision. So that just kind of shows that birds seem to be attracted into specific light sources, not just generally disoriented by the glow and brightness of a city or an urban area at night, but really just turning lights off in individual rooms and individual buildings can really make a big difference to reduce building collisions, which, like we're talking about, is a really big source of mortality. It's a little up for debate if cats or building collisions are the biggest sources of mortality, but both of them are up there and pretty preventable if we think about it. So you may have heard, I don't know if anyone's heard about this story of Flacco, the owl who was in New York. So he's a non-native owl, but he was at the Central Park Zoo and escaped about a year ago, and then got pretty internet famous and was very beloved because it was just hanging around in Central Park. And a few months ago, it was found dead after a building collision. So that was really sad, but there was a lot of outpouring of support and sadness for this bird because he was really famous. And so that kind of, the silver lining is that this got a lot of attention and resulted in a push for legislation in the New York State Congress. So they're looking to pass a Bird Safe Buildings Act where they'd have to use materials demonstrated to reduce collision risk in new government buildings, and also a Dark Skies Protection Act, which would require outdoor lighting to be covered or limited to certain hours in certain parts of the city. So you can tell that dark skies are really an important part of reducing building collisions for birds, especially during migration, but also just for any bird, including Flacco. And okay, moving on from birds, Nancy's been telling me that there's a lot of fireflies in West Newbury, which is awesome, and I really want to see them. I definitely remember growing up seeing fireflies and catching fireflies outside on warm summer evenings, and they're super beautiful. And I know a lot of people like have that kind of memory too and feel that connection. Something I didn't realize is that there's more than 2,000 species of butterflies fireflies, excuse me, in the world, and that they live on every continent except Antarctica. I kind of thought there was just one species of firefly, but we have 270 species just in North America. So this guy here is the eastern firefly on the bottom corner. That's the most common firefly species in North America. And they're not super well studied, but we can tell that populations are dwindling and maybe even crashing. People aren't seeing them anymore in the places they used to. There's 18 species at risk of extinction in North America alone, and that's probably an undercount. This is due to a lot of things like loss of habitat and pesticide use, definitely with insects, invasive species, non-native plants, climate change. So there's a lot going on, but also for fireflies, light pollution can be a big problem for them because they, of course, communicate through their bioluminescence. So they're using this photochemical process to glow, and they flash to do a bunch of stuff, but basically to communicate, to warn off predators, to find mates. The larvae even glow to warn predators that they are toxic and taste bad. And ALAN, artificial light at night, disrupts this whole language of communication that they have developed. So each species uses different timed flashes to communicate their sex and their species. So you can differentiate some species just based on their flash pattern. And when they don't flash at each other, they don't find each other and they don't mate. And in the presence of artificial light, they produce 50% fewer flashes. So they're just flashing less. They're unable to find each other, and they can kind of get discouraged if they can't find each other after a little bit because it's too bright and they aren't able to see the other flashes, and they just kind of give up. So we're basically ruining their romantic evenings and getting in the way of them reproducing because they don't flash, they're unable to find each other, and that is one thought that is a reason behind their decline as well, in addition to all the other challenges they're facing. So other insects and other pollinators, not just insects, but stuff like moths and bats and beetles, they're pretty key in pollinating plants, but we might not think of them as much as we think of like bees or butterflies or stuff that we see during the daytime. But for nighttime pollinators, artificial light also impacts them, and it deters them from their nightly routine. Some of them get attracted to and disoriented by the light, like you can totally think of moths drawn to a light, but others just avoid brightly lit areas because they're unable to see as well, and they're more likely to be seen by predators. So one study found that the interactions between plants and nocturnal pollinators in a lit meadow was 62% lower than in an unlit meadow. So they're just not active in pollinating. And they are a key part of our pollination networks. So that's another thing when we're lighting these outdoor spaces that can reduce that component of our pollinator network. And even plants are impacted by light pollution as well. So plants actually have a sleep cycle too. They do different stuff during the day than at night. They also have photoreceptors that take in light, and this helps them to determine photo period, so day length again, and that helps them know when to bloom out and when to drop their leaves. And during the day, they're photosynthesizing light and making food, but under constant light conditions caused by artificial light, they continue to photosynthesize all day long, which is actually bad for them. They get stressed out, and it's sort of like, working out 24/7. They need a rest, and it's in the long term not good for them. If you look over here on this side where the trees are, you can see that this deciduous tree that should be dropping its leaves as it turns to fall has keeping its leaves longer than normal. And even the side that's closer to this, I hope you can see my mouse, but the side that's closer to this light is keeping its leaves longer than the other side. So a bunch of stuff can be impacted by light, their phenology or their timing, their growth, and how they allocate their resources. So even plants are affected too. Okay, you've bared with me. We've gone really in depth into some of the negative impacts of light pollution and talked about why we might want to protect dark skies and decrease how much light pollution we're putting out there. So we're going to talk a little bit about what we can do about this and how we can create change on a larger scale, but also, in our own homes and in our own community. So this is from the International Dark Sky Association, but again, a dark sky doesn't just mean a dark ground. So we need smart lighting that directs light where it is needed and creates a balance between safety and starlight. So again, we're not trying to turn off all the lights, but we do want to light things smarter and more efficiently in a way that is less harmful. So you can start by thinking about these best practices for outdoor lighting in your own home if you wanted to. So there's these 5 principles that the International Dark Sky Association recommends. So for one, you want light to be useful and to only really light areas that you really need to be lit. Like if you need to move through there all the time at night, you should probably light that area, but maybe not an area that you never need to move through at night, or you very rarely need to move through at night. You can also consider, something like a curb or a step that you want to see at night, when you're walking through. You could use something like reflective paint so that that place is more visible with less light, but you don't need to have a full light on it all the time. You also want to use targeted light, so that light is only falling where it's needed, avoiding that light trespass like we talked about. And so you can use shielding and aiming the light downwards so that light doesn't escape upwards or out to the sides in places where you didn't intend it to go. We want lights to be low level, so not brighter than is really necessary. Some surfaces are more reflective than others, so that can impact how bright you need a light to be. Also controlling lights, so putting on timers or motion detectors so that there's only light when you truly need light, or where it can be dimmed or turned off when it's not needed. And lastly, like we talked about with the different colors of light, we want to use warm colored light for outdoor lighting when it's possible, because that shorter wavelength light is the most harmful to us and to wildlife. So you can just see in terms of targeted light, like we're talking about, this might be an example of regular light that's not shielded and it's letting light escape upwards and outwards, versus a dark sky friendly light that is shielded. It's only sending the light downwards to where we actually need it, and it's preventing light from escaping outwards from the side. So that down shielded light is kind of the best possible option, that we're lighting what we actually want to be visible. And I mentioned we were going to talk about LEDs. I don't have like a one size fits all solution for this, but a lot of people are converting more to LEDs because they're way more energy efficient, use 90% less energy. They can last 25 times longer than traditional incandescent bulbs, but they also use more blue light. So there's energy and cost savings, which is really important, especially as we talk about electricity consumption. But they do have this downside in the way that they produce a lot more blue light. Blue light also scatters more than other colors because it's so high energy, so it can kind of bounce around places you didn't expect it to or intend it to. And there's also this issue where, because they're cheaper and they use less electricity, people tend to just overlight with them because the overall cost is still low, but they might use way more light than they need. And they're also really bright. So we think about light bulbs based on wattage normally, like how many watts a certain light bulb is. But that's how much energy the bulb consumes. But with LEDs, you should also look at their lumens, which is their brightness. So a 30-watt LED bulb has the same brightness as a 250-watt incandescent bulb. So you don't want to just be looking at watts when you're thinking about LEDs. It can be a bit hard to find low wattage LEDs, but I think there's more and more of them coming into the market. And also choosing LEDs with warmer light. So you can see here you want something really below this 4000 Kelvin is best for outdoor lighting. Those lights scatter less and cause less damage and produce this warmer color, orangey yellow light. And really the best solution is you might want to use some LEDs and some traditional bulbs. It sort of depends on what you're lighting and how often and when and stuff, but just overall using less light outdoors is a great guiding principle. And you can see in this photo, this is Baltimore and DC metro areas, and you can just see the difference where a lot of places have switched to light their streets with LEDs, which makes sense because it's energy efficient, but there was some pushback in DC. So Baltimore's above and DC is below. And in DC, there was a lot of pushback when they started converting to LEDs on the street lamps because people were complaining that they weren't able to sleep at night because they were too bright. So you can see just the color difference between Baltimore and DC. DC has this warmer glow versus Baltimore with LEDs has a more white light going on. So I'm going to wrap it up shortly, but my biggest advice is to check out the Dark Sky International website because it's a great resource for making your own lighting decisions and just learning more about this topic. They have a lot of resources about how to light your own home and certify a bunch of different lighting products and companies. And they also help certify and conserve international dark sky places, which is really cool. So those are different areas that preserve their dark skies through policy, basically. And there's more than 200 certified dark sky places around the world. Katahdin up in Maine is one of them. They also have a bunch of educational resources on this website as well. And in terms of timing, the best practices, especially during peak bird migration, so in the spring and the fall, is to turn off non-essential outdoor lighting between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. specifically, because that is the most impactful for migratory birds. And just that follows that principle of only using light when needed, because most of us don't really need the lights on between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. too much. So the good news is that unlike other pollutants, if we stop emitting light, we'll be able to see our dark skies clearly, really fast. It's not going to be a persistent thing in the atmosphere the way plastic is in our oceans or anything like that. So we have the ability to make really quick change, which is really exciting. You can see over here how drastically different the sky looked during a blackout in the Northeast in 2003. So you can see this sky glow and orangey light versus this beautiful view of the Milky Way when all the lights are out. So that just can happen in an instant, in a night. But of course, we don't need a blackout to see a difference in what the night sky looks like. And we're not going to be, living in complete darkness anytime soon. But you can see over here that this is a city of Philadelphia doing a lights out program for bird migration in the spring one year. And you can see this top photo is just regular, the city lights on regularly, and it's got a pretty good amount of sky glow and not so many stars visible versus below when they turn the lights off to a certain degree. This is still a very well lit city. People are driving, people are going where they need to go. It's not like we've turned all the lights off, but this slight adjustment makes the sky glow way less and makes some stars start to be visible. And you can just see the difference there between a few minutes and with just a few tweaks. So that's pretty cool and I think very hopeful. So I'll just end by saying that I think there's a lot to lose when we obscure our night sky, and it's good to be thinking about this topic because there's actions we could all take to help preserve night skies and dark skies, which would be good for us, good for the ecosystems we depend on. And I think the first step is just talking about it and learning about the problem. So thank you to all very much. I'll stop sharing and I'll end it there.
Thank you so much, Madeline. My internet's unstable, so I don't know if you can hear me, but if you want to come off screen, turn on your video, you're welcome to. and you can unmute to ask a question, or you can type in the chat, whichever you feel more comfortable with.
I don't have a question. I just want to thank you. That was awesome. Really amazing presentation.
You. Thank you so much. Glad you came and got to see it.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, for those of you that don't know Jan, she's a local artist, and she is going to be working with the Refuge to do a whole art campaign around pollinators and dark skies this year. So we're pretty excited to be working with her.
I wanted to ask about the satellites, all the satellites that they're putting up, and what is that going to do to the night sky?
So I definitely wouldn't say that I'm an expert. I honestly am not I'm not sure exactly, but I would say I think in terms of light pollution for our visibility of the night sky and the darkness we perceive, it's more about like what we emit on the ground. Of course, having something really bright constantly in the sky could cause changes in what the night sky looks like and visibility issues, but it's more about what we emit. You know, the sky glow is really caused by when we emit light up and then it gets scattered and diffuse in the atmosphere, and that is like a big impact. So I think it is more about the light we kind of put up into the atmosphere that then reduces the visibility of what we're able to see through that. But it's an interesting topic to learn more about, because I didn't really come across that in anything that I was researching. So I am not 100% sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Any other questions? While I wait, as Madeline mentioned, I just want to put a plug that the Firefly seems to be pretty active starting about 3 weeks ago. And I don't really, actually, it's a new thing for me too. I have not noticed them as much in the past. And this year seems to be a really good year. So I'm not sure if it's warmer temperatures, like nights that are not super windy. But if you can find a place with tall grass, unmowed grass, obviously no herbicide use, and especially areas that's near wetlands that, look in the grass and look in the trees, and they start around like right when it gets dark around 9:30, and they go till about 11 midnight. But they're like really active around 9:30, 10 o'clock. So it's a pretty amazing sight if you haven't seen it. And hopefully we all get to enjoy that. And if you do want to check out more information, West Newbury Warren Native website does have a page on dark skies. We're going to be updating that. As like Madeline mentioned, there's so many resources out there. And I think, as she also mentioned, this is not something we typically think about. Even those of us that like enjoy the dark skies and wildlife. So it's definitely, we're trying to push, do more education, with our neighbors, with our friends, with our towns. We're hoping to present in front of the planning board in the adjacent towns, just to educate them about, why it's important, and for people to be kind of thoughtful about their lighting choices that they make for their houses. So I hope you can join on that and share this presentation, which will be, like I mentioned, on the website for both the library and Wow Native. So if there's no questions, thank you so much. Thank you, Malin.
Yeah,
Great
thank you all. It's great to see everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, well, go enjoy the night.
Bye.
Hope it's-
Bye.
Bye.